Have you ever stopped to think, if you had just 1 minute to live, what would you do? I never imagined I would have to ask myself that very question. But one day, I found myself staring down at death, and what I saw, well, it changed everything. My name is Jack, and I'm 65 years old. I've lived a fairly quiet life. I've been married, raised 2 wonderful children, and now I spend my days in the slow, peaceful rhythm of retirement. Most days, I can be found tending to the garden or watching the birds outside my window. It's a good life, a simple life. But that all changed one morning in May. I woke up with a tightness in my chest, a burning pain that felt like someone had a fist wrapped around my heart. I tried to ignore it, figured it would pass like the little aches and pains that come with aging, but this was different. The pain kept getting worse, and I couldn't breathe. I started sweating, my vision blurred, and I felt a cold, heavy weight pressing on my chest. I had no choice but to call 911. The paramedics arrived quickly, and they rushed me to the hospital. It felt like hours in the back of the ambulance, but I wasn't paying much attention to the time. My mind was racing, too focused on the pain in my chest and the sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong. By the time we reached the hospital, the pain had dulled somewhat, but I knew deep down that something wasn't right. The doctor told me I was having a heart attack. Not just any heart attack, but a massive one. He said I needed surgery immediately if I had any hope of surviving. As they prepared me for the operating room, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't sure why, but I was strangely at peace with whatever was happening. When I laid on that operating table, I could feel the cold steel of the instruments, the soft hum of machines around me, and the faint sounds of people talking. My mind began to drift, and suddenly, everything felt far away. And then, it happened. My heart stopped. I'm not sure how long it lasted, but in that moment, everything went completely silent. I remember the doctors rushing to try and revive me, but I could no longer hear them, couldn't feel them. The world as I knew it, the world of sound and sensation, faded into nothingness. I wasn't sure what was happening. I didn't know if I was dreaming, if this was some kind of hallucination, or if I was actually gone. But one thing was certain, I felt no pain. No fear. There was just this profound, almost peaceful sense of nothingness. And then, I felt it. A pulling sensation. A gentle tug, as if I were being lifted from the very core of my being. I looked down, and I saw myself, lying there on the operating table. My body, still and lifeless, surrounded by doctors who were desperately trying to bring me back. But I wasn't there. I was floating above it all. It wasn't like anything I could have imagined. There was no bright light, no tunnel, nothing like the stories you hear. No, it was just calm. Quiet. I felt weightless, free from the restrictions of my body. It was as if I was no longer bound by the laws of the physical world. The feeling was overwhelming, like a rush of relief, of freedom. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It felt like I was stepping into a vast, open space where nothing mattered except the pure sensation of being. At first, I was confused. I looked back down at my body, my heart heavy with the strange realization that I was no longer alive. My life was slipping away, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. But then, I heard a voice. It wasn't a voice like the ones I'd heard before, a voice that came from someone near me. No, this voice came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was soft, but its presence was undeniable, like a vibration that resonated deep within me. "You can stay, or you can go back," the voice said. The words echoed in my mind, a simple message with profound implications. The choice was mine. Stay or go back. I hadn't even realized that I had the option to return. There was no anger, no fear, no desperation to stay. It was as if the decision itself didn't matter. The calmness I felt, the peace, was so complete that the idea of choosing didn't seem necessary. But then, something shifted within me. There were things left unfinished in my life, things I hadn't said, moments I hadn't fully experienced. I thought about my family, my children, and my wife. The thought of leaving them behind, of never seeing their faces again, suddenly felt unbearable. I hadn't said goodbye. There was so much more I wanted to do. I didn't feel ready. So, I made my choice. I want to go back, I whispered, or maybe I thought it, I'm not sure. The strange thing was, once I made the decision, it was like my body reacted without me even trying. Before I could process what was happening, I felt myself being pulled back toward the table. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel the sensation of movement, as if gravity were reasserting itself, pulling me back into my form. It was sudden, sharp, and almost painful. I felt like I was being dragged back into a suit that didn't quite fit anymore. And then, with a jolt, I was awake. The pain came rushing back. The tightness in my chest, the inability to breathe, everything that had been so far away was suddenly too real. I was back. I was alive. But I didn't feel the same. I opened my eyes, and the world seemed foreign. The room was blurry, voices filled the air, but I couldn't focus on anything. I wasn't sure what had just happened, and no one around me seemed to understand. They were too busy with the machines, the wires, the medications. They were doing their job, trying to save me, but I knew, deep inside, I had just crossed a threshold that no one else had. When the doctors told me I was stable, I could hardly believe it. How was that possible? How had I returned? But as the hours passed, and the haze of the anesthesia began to wear off, I realized that my journey wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. I had come back to life, but I wasn't the same. Not entirely. And the question that had never left my mind was the one I kept coming back to: what now? Because, you see, I had seen something beyond death, something that most people can only dream of. And it was something that I couldn't ignore. I had come back, but what did it all mean? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? There's a strange stillness that comes when you realize you're no longer in your body. It's almost as if the world stops spinning, yet everything around you continues. When I floated away from my physical form, I wasn't frightened. No, I was overwhelmed by a calmness that I can't quite put into words. It's like I was being held by the universe itself, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I don't know how to explain the sensation of leaving your own body. I remember feeling a lightness, as though I was becoming weightless. My body, heavy and motionless on the operating table, felt like it was no longer a part of me. It was like I was shedding an old coat that had become too tight. I felt myself being drawn upward, slowly at first, then more quickly, as if some invisible force was guiding me toward something. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. I looked down and saw myself lying there, unconscious, with doctors and nurses working frantically to revive me. They didn't seem to notice me floating above them. I wasn't scared, though. I wasn't frightened because I knew, in some deep part of my being, that I wasn't gone. Not yet. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or if this was some kind of cosmic transition, but I didn't feel any urgency to return. I floated upward, my vision shifting from the sterile white of the operating room to something far grander, something more profound. It was hard to focus on the details at first, because everything around me was so blurry and intangible, but one thing stood out. The light. At first, I didn't even realize what I was seeing. It wasn't the typical, bright light at the end of the tunnel you hear about in stories. No, this was different. The light wasn't blinding, but it was warm, inviting, and somehow filled with a peaceful energy. It wasn't just light, it felt like the very essence of calm, of love, and of acceptance. I was drawn to it, like a moth to a flame, but without the fear of being burned. I remember being captivated by it. I could see it before me, but I couldn't quite get a grasp on it. It was as if the light was both everywhere and nowhere, expanding and contracting at the same time. It wasn't a source of light that came from a single point. It was a vast field of glowing energy, stretching out beyond my sight. And then, I felt it, the presence. There wasn't any voice that spoke to me, but there was a deep, knowing presence. It was like a communication without words, a subtle transmission of understanding. I wasn't sure if it was the light itself or something that existed within it, but I knew in that moment that I was not alone. Whatever this presence was, it was familiar. It was comforting. It was as though it had been waiting for me. The moment was surreal. I wasn't sure whether to stay in awe of the light or to try and make sense of it, but I found myself simply existing within it. I felt no urgency, no time constraints, just a boundless sense of peace. It was like being enveloped in a warm embrace, but without any physical contact. I couldn't see the boundaries of this place, there were no walls, no ground beneath me, just the infinite, calm expanse of the light. In this space, I felt no pain. There was no sorrow, no anxiety, no fear. All the things I had carried with me through my life, the doubts, the regrets, the worries, all of that simply evaporated. In that light, I was whole, complete, and at peace. For a moment, I wondered if I had died. But then, the thought drifted away as soon as it arrived. It didn't matter. I wasn't concerned with whether I had crossed over into the afterlife. I simply was. I didn't know how long I was there, floating in that glowing expanse. Time, or the concept of time, didn't seem to exist in this place. I was lost in the sensation of peace, the endless calm that surrounded me. But then, something shifted. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a faint tug at the back of my mind. I felt the pull again, the sensation of being drawn somewhere. This time, the pull wasn't gentle, it was stronger, more insistent. It felt as though I was being gently nudged, or maybe even guided, back toward something. But to where? And why? The pull came again, and I realized, it was time to go back. But I wasn't ready. I had just discovered what felt like eternal peace, and now, something was calling me back to the world I had left behind. I didn't know if I was prepared to go back. But as much as I felt that pull, I couldn't ignore it. There was something about it that felt right. Something about returning. I was being given a choice. You can stay, the presence seemed to say, or you can return. It wasn't a command. It wasn't an order. It was an offering, a question posed to me, and I could sense that whatever choice I made would carry significant weight. The thought of staying in that serene place, the place of pure peace and stillness, was tempting. I felt the pull of that peace, the temptation to let go of all the struggles, the worries, the pain of life. I felt as though I could remain there forever and never feel lonely, never feel fear, never feel sorrow again. But then, I thought of my family. I thought of my children, my wife, the people I loved. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving them behind without so much as a goodbye. There were things I hadn't done, moments I hadn't lived through, and I wasn't ready to leave them all behind just yet. So, with a quiet whisper in my heart, I made my choice. I want to go back, I thought. And just like that, I felt myself being pulled away from the light, away from that infinite peace, back toward the cold, sterile world of the operating room. It was as if the very essence of me was being drawn back to the body that had once been mine. The sensation was jarring, almost painful. The pull was strong, sharp, and I felt like I was being dragged through some invisible barrier, back into the confines of flesh and bone. And then, I was back. My eyes shot open, and I was staring up at the ceiling of the operating room. The blinding lights overhead were harsh, and the noise around me, machines beeping, voices shouting, was overwhelming. I could feel the weight of my body again, the heaviness of my chest, the ache of every muscle. I was alive. But somehow, I wasn't quite the same. As I lay there, struggling to breathe, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something behind in that glowing light, something I couldn't fully explain. I had chosen to return, but a part of me remained in that place, that serene expanse of peace. And now, as I looked around the room, I was left with one question: what now? I had come back to life, but life as I knew it would never be the same again. What does it feel like to leave your body and step into another world? The truth is, I don't know if there are words strong enough to describe the experience, but I'll try. When I floated away from my body, there wasn't a single thought in my mind, not even fear. It was as though my consciousness had been unplugged from the physical world. No more pain, no more heartache, no more time rushing past. There was only a stillness, a quiet peace that enveloped me like a blanket. I didn't know where I was, but it didn't matter. I was suspended in something beyond any form of description, a place so tranquil and pure that, for a long while, I didn't want to leave. It wasn't a dark void, nor was it a blinding brightness, it was something in between, an almost ethereal, translucent glow that bathed everything around me. I can't say I saw anything in the traditional sense, but I felt it. I didn't have eyes, not in the way I do now, yet I could see every inch of this space. I was aware of my surroundings, though they weren't defined by any physical boundaries. It felt like being immersed in a warm, ever-expanding light, a place that had no walls, no beginning, and no end. It was simply vast. Limitless. A space where time didn't exist. But it wasn't just the space I felt. There was a sensation, a deep knowing, that this place was alive, alive in a way I had never experienced before. It wasn't just a place, it was a presence. A presence that seemed to know me better than I knew myself. And this presence, whatever it was, wasn't judgmental. It wasn't harsh or cold. It was comforting, accepting. It welcomed me in as though I had always belonged. I can't even explain how it felt to be there. It was like stepping into a world where everything was perfectly aligned, where everything was at peace. It was as though all my worries, all my regrets, all the burdens I'd carried with me through life had simply vanished. I didn't feel alone, not even for a second. I've heard people describe their near-death experiences as being bathed in a bright, almost blinding light. For me, it wasn't like that. The light I encountered wasn't overwhelming. It was gentle, soft, like the first rays of sunshine after a long storm. It didn't shine directly into my eyes, but it surrounded me in a soothing, non-intrusive way. I could feel it, as if it was both outside of me and a part of me at the same time. There was no language here, at least not in the way we understand it. It wasn't as if words were spoken, but more like a direct understanding, a form of communication that didn't rely on sound. It's like being in the presence of someone who doesn't need to say anything because everything is already understood. There was no need for clarification, no need for questions. Whatever was happening in that place was simply known. I don't know if I was ready to understand everything, but I could feel the energy, the love, and the peace radiating from it. For a brief moment, I became aware of everything in my life, the people I loved, the moments I had cherished, and the things I had left undone. I didn't have a body, yet I felt so alive in that space. It wasn't just my soul, it was my very essence. I was in tune with everything, as though I had shed the limits of my physical existence. And then, just as I began to understand the vastness of this experience, something changed. I wasn't alone anymore. At first, I didn't know if I was imagining it or if it was the presence I had felt earlier, but I knew, deep down, that something was there with me. A being, or rather a presence, not of this world. It wasn't human, but it didn't feel alien either. It felt familiar. It wasn't speaking in words, yet I could sense the communication happening. It was as though it had been waiting for me. The presence didn't offer any explanations, nor did it need to. It simply was. I didn't feel an overwhelming urge to understand it, I just felt safe. Safe in a way I had never known in my life. There were no fears here, no uncertainties. There was just a profound sense of belonging. At that moment, I realized something I hadn't expected: the question that had been swirling in my mind the entire time: was this the end, or was it a transition? The present seemed to answer, though not in words. I was given a choice, as though it were an offer I couldn't refuse. The light, the space I had found myself in, seemed to hum with a sense of patience, waiting for my decision. And then I heard a question in my heart, more of a feeling than a thought. Do you want to stay, or do you want to go back? The choice wasn't clear at first. I could have stayed there, in that blissful, peaceful state, surrounded by the light and love. I could have chosen to leave everything behind, to no longer worry about the pain of living, the struggles, and the inevitable aging that had once felt like an overwhelming burden. But then I thought of my family. I thought of my children, my wife, those whom I loved so deeply. And the moment that thought crossed my mind, the decision became clear. I wasn't ready to say goodbye to them. Not yet. I didn't want to leave them, to leave behind everything that made my life meaningful. I wanted to finish the work I had started, to experience the moments that still awaited me. And so, I made my choice. I want to go back, I thought. And with that thought, the pull began again. Only this time, it wasn't gentle. It was powerful, urgent, like being drawn back into a body I hadn't realized I'd left behind. The sense of peace began to fade, and the warmth of the light was replaced with an overwhelming sensation of being pulled toward the cold, familiar darkness of my body. The transition was not easy. There was no calm, no gentle return. The moment I decided to go back, I felt like I was being dragged through an invisible barrier, my awareness being pulled from that place of peace back into the confusion of my life. And then, I was awake. The pain returned almost immediately. My chest burned with the weight of life, cold, sharp, and heavy. The world around me came rushing back with such force that it made my head spin. The sterile smells of the operating room, the beeping machines, the voices shouting instructions, all of it felt like an assault to my senses. But I was alive. I was back. Yet, somehow, I wasn't the same. The world around me felt distant, as though I were no longer part of it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something more, something beyond the veil of life and death. A part of me, some deep, unshakable part, was still floating in that place of peace. I couldn't explain it to anyone, not even myself. It was as if I had crossed into another dimension, seen something no one else could, and now, I was here, struggling to make sense of it all. But one thing was certain, I had come back with a new understanding. I wasn't the same person who had gone under the knife. Something inside me had shifted. I didn't know how to explain it, but the experience had changed me, profoundly and irrevocably. And as I lay there, breathing in the sterile air, I knew I had a choice to make. What was I going to do with the second chance I had been given? And so, I began to ask myself, what is life really about? I woke up in that sterile hospital room with a heavy heart and a dizzying head. The world around me felt foreign, detached, almost as though I had just been thrust back into a life I had left behind. It wasn't that I wasn't grateful to be alive, but something inside me had shifted, something fundamental. I couldn't help but feel like I was living in two realities at once. The one I had just returned to, and the one I had briefly stepped out of. I was no longer the man I had been before the surgery. I wasn't sure exactly how to explain it, but I could feel the difference deep inside. Every breath I took felt more intentional. Every movement, every glance, every moment of silence seemed laden with a deeper understanding I didn't have before. The weight of the world, which had once felt so oppressive and overwhelming, now seemed distant, almost irrelevant. I felt a strange sense of freedom, as though the worries that had plagued me for years no longer had a hold on me. But the truth was, I was also terrified. I was terrified of how I had changed and how others would react to that change. I couldn't exactly tell my family that I had just had a conversation with light, or that I had been in the presence of something, or someone, that felt far beyond this world. No one would believe me. My wife, my children, everyone would think I was just imagining things, or worse, that I had simply snapped. There was no room in their world for the experience I had had, the peace I had felt, the light I had seen. But I couldn't forget it. I couldn't forget the feeling of weightlessness, of peace. I couldn't forget the way the light had embraced me, the sense that I was not alone, that there was something out there, something bigger, something more than just the humdrum of everyday life. And I knew, deep down, that I had been given a choice, the choice, to stay or to go. And I chose to come back. But now I was back in a world that didn't seem to understand what I had experienced. And that made me feel like an outsider. No one could see what I had seen. No one could understand what I had felt. I had returned to my family, but I wasn't really there. I was still caught between the world I had left behind and the one I had glimpsed beyond. I tried to explain to my wife, Anne, what had happened. She sat beside me, her hands trembling as she held mine. Her eyes were full of concern for my health, concern for my state of mind, but I could tell she was struggling to understand. "David," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion, "I know it must have been terrifying for you. But you're here now. That's what matters. You're back with us, and that's all that counts." I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to say, "Anne, I saw something. Something that you can't even imagine. I saw the other side, and it was real. It was more real than anything we've ever known. And I'm not the same man who went under that knife." But I couldn't. I couldn't say it because I didn't want her to think I was losing my mind. I felt a deep conflict inside me, between the man I was before and the man I had become after my experience. The world felt smaller now, more confined. My work, my routines, the daily tasks I once found important, they all seemed trivial in comparison to the vastness I had touched. But I also knew that I had responsibilities. I had people who depended on me. My family needed me, even if I felt like I no longer belonged here. It was frustrating. I couldn't go back to my old life. Not really. The man I had been before my near-death experience felt like a ghost, a memory, a shadow that no longer had the same significance it once did. I wanted to change. I wanted to live differently, but how could I? How could I explain to my children, my wife, that everything had shifted for me in a way that they couldn't understand? And so, I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I buried my feelings. I pushed the experience into the back of my mind, just like everyone else seemed to expect me to. I told myself that maybe I had just hallucinated. Maybe the drugs from the anesthesia had caused me to dream, to slip into some kind of strange state of consciousness. It wasn't what I believed, but it was the only thing I could think of to make it fit in the world I was now back in. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the truth kept bubbling up. The peace I had felt. The certainty. The light. The presence that had been with me. They were all too real. And even though I couldn't fully understand them, I knew I couldn't just pretend they hadn't happened. I began to notice subtle changes in myself. I found that I no longer feared death. I had been face to face with it, had even stepped into what felt like the beyond, and I had returned with an entirely new perspective. The things I had once worried about. Money, health, the opinions of others, no longer held any sway over me. I knew there was something more than this physical life, and that knowledge freed me in ways I couldn't explain. But it also isolated me. How could I talk about my experience without sounding like I was crazy? How could I tell anyone that I had seen beyond the veil of death, felt a presence that made me realize there was more to life than what we see? How could I make them understand? The more I kept it to myself, the more isolated I felt. I began to withdraw from my family, even as I remained physically present with them. I wasn't trying to push them away. I just didn't know how to bridge the gap between what I had experienced and the world they were still living in. And then, one night, as I sat alone in my room, looking out at the quiet world through the window, I heard a voice. It wasn't a voice I could hear with my ears, but it was a voice I could feel deep in my soul. It wasn't speaking words, but it was speaking to me nonetheless. "David, the voice seemed to say, "You've been given a gift. Don't let it go to waste. Share it with others. You don't have to explain everything. You don't have to have all the answers. But share what you felt. Share what you saw." I didn't know where the voice came from, or who, or what it was. But in that moment, I understood. I had returned with a purpose. A purpose that went beyond just living my life as I had before. It was time to stop hiding, time to stop pretending that everything was the same. The fear of rejection, of being misunderstood, had held me back for so long. But now, in the quiet of that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had been given a second chance at life, yes. But I had also been given something far greater, a deeper understanding of what truly matters. And that was something I couldn't keep to myself. I didn't know exactly how I would share it or who would listen. But I knew I had to start somewhere. It was time to stop being afraid and to start living fully, not just for myself, but for others too. And so, I began to think about how I could tell my story. I began to realize that I wasn't the only one who had questions about life and death, about what comes after, about the mysteries of the universe. There were others out there, people just like me, who needed to hear the truth, even if it was just the piece of truth I had experienced. I didn't have all the answers. But I had a story. And that was a start. It was time to share what I had learned. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to let the world know that there was more than just this life, and that death, in the end, was nothing to fear. And so, with that thought, I took the first step forward into the unknown. I still remember that night so clearly. The night I knew my life had truly changed. I had woken up from a state I couldn't quite explain, my body heavy with the burden of life but my soul light with a knowing that death wasn't the end. The profound sense of peace, the clarity that washed over me like an ocean tide, these feelings were more than a fleeting experience, they were the very core of the message I had received. But what was I supposed to do with it? How could I carry this knowing into a world that hadn't seen what I had seen? I began to realize something deeply important during those early days after returning. When I thought back on the experience, the light, the presence, there was one thing that stood out above all, the overwhelming sense of love. It wasn't just a peaceful, serene feeling, it was love, a love that embraced me, that accepted me, that didn't care about my flaws or mistakes. It was the purest, most unconditional love I had ever known. And that was the lesson I learned in that place beyond life, love is everything. I had spent so much of my life worrying about things that no longer mattered. I had focused on accumulating wealth, chasing success, trying to live up to expectations I had placed on myself or that others had placed on me. I had been so wrapped up in proving my worth, achieving my goals, and holding on to things that were fleeting. And in the end, I realized none of that would go with me when I left this world. But love transcended everything. Love was the thread that wove all things together, the only thing that truly mattered in the grand scheme of life. I remember thinking about my family, the people I had always loved. It was love that had kept me going all those years. It was love that had made me wake up every morning, even when life seemed overwhelming. But I had never truly understood the power of love, not until I was on the other side. Now, I looked at my wife, Anne, and I saw her with different eyes. I saw her not just as my partner, not just as the woman who had shared my life, but as a soul, a beautiful, unique soul who, just like me, was a part of something much larger. I no longer took for granted the time we had together. I realized that our love was not just something we experienced in the here and now, it was eternal. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened, our souls would remain intertwined. My children too, they were no longer just my children. They were beings of light, just like me, with their own paths to walk, their own journeys to take. I didn't feel this need to protect them in the same way anymore, not because I didn't care, but because I now understood that we were all connected in ways that transcended time and space. Their lives were their own, their lessons were theirs to learn, and I had to allow them to live fully, to experience their own soul's purpose. I also started to understand something else, something that took me a while to fully grasp. It wasn't about waiting for death to come in order to experience peace. The peace I had felt on the other side wasn't a destination. It wasn't something I could only have after I died. No, it was something I could carry with me right here, right now. This was a revelation that changed everything. I had spent so much of my life waiting for moments to come, for the right time to make a change, for the perfect circumstances to be in place. But now I knew, life was always in the present. Peace was something that lived within me, and if I could align myself with love and acceptance, then I could experience that peace at any moment. The question wasn't when death would come or what would happen afterward. The real question was, how could I live in a way that was true to this understanding of love, peace, and connection? How could I bring what I had learned into my daily life? I knew I couldn't go back to living the same way I had before. It wasn't that my life had been bad, but it had been driven by the wrong priorities. I had been living in a state of fear and distraction, never truly appreciating the present moment or the people around me. Now, I had a deep awareness of how fleeting life is, and how precious each moment was. So, I began to make changes. Small changes at first, but changes that felt profound. I started to appreciate the simple things, sitting with and in the evenings, enjoying the quiet. I started to really listen to my children when they spoke, to hear their hopes, their fears, their dreams. I spent less time worrying about the future, less time stressing about things I couldn't control. Instead, I focused on the now, on the people I loved, on the moments that mattered. I started to volunteer at a local shelter, helping others in ways I hadn't before. I wanted to share the love I had felt, the love that had transformed me, with those who were struggling. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew that love and compassion were the most important things I could give. But perhaps the most important change came in how I viewed death. It wasn't something to fear anymore. It wasn't something to avoid or deny. It was simply a transition, a return to the peace I had felt in that other world. It was a step into the next chapter, not an end. And that understanding gave me a sense of peace I hadn't had before. But my experience also made me realize something else, something that was hard for me to accept at first: we are all connected. There is no real separation between us. I had always thought of myself as an individual, separate from others, living my life with my own set of experiences. But now I saw it differently. Every person I met, every life I touched, was a part of the same universal experience. We are all made of the same light, the same love. This realization wasn't easy to accept, and it didn't come all at once. At first, I still wanted to hold on to my old self, my individual identity. But little by little, I began to let go. I began to understand that I wasn't just a man named David, I was a part of something much greater. And in this interconnectedness, I saw that everything I did, every action I took, mattered. My life was meaningful, not because of what I had achieved, but because of the love I shared, the way I connected with others, and the way I chose to live. I started to notice something else as well: the way people responded to me had changed. And noticed it first. "David, you're different. You're more present, more here with me. It's like you're actually with us now, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually." It was true. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I was engaged. I was living with intention. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I was no longer afraid of death. And with that fear gone, I could finally start to live fully. I didn't need to chase after the approval of others. I didn't need to worry about the things I couldn't control. All I had to do was love with all my heart, love with all my being, and share that love with everyone I met. And so, with a deep sense of gratitude, I took the next step on this journey, knowing that whatever came next, I was not alone. I had love. I had light. And that, in the end, was all that really mattered. This was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? I thought that with this newfound knowledge, this understanding of the true nature of life and death, things would suddenly become clear. I thought that I would be able to walk through the world with this bright new light and effortlessly share it with those around me. But that wasn't the case at all. The truth was, the more I tried to explain what had happened to me, the more I felt isolated. At first, it seemed like a small thing. I could barely find the right words, the right way to articulate the depth of the experience I had lived. I had come back from the brink, and in doing so, I had seen the face of eternity, touched the purity of peace, and felt love beyond comprehension. But to say any of that aloud to someone who hadn't been there, who hadn't experienced the same things I had, well, it made me feel like I was speaking another language, one no one could understand. I tried with Anne at first. I thought she would understand. She's my partner in life, the one person who's been by my side through thick and thin. I thought that the love we shared would help bridge the gap between the two worlds, the world of the living and the world beyond. But when I tried to explain to her, when I talked about the light, the peace, the overwhelming sense of love I had felt, I saw the confusion in her eyes. She didn't say it, but I could tell she didn't fully get it. She tried, bless her heart, but it wasn't something she could wrap her mind around. After all, how could she? She hadn't been there. She hadn't felt what I felt. She would nod and squeeze my hand, telling me, "I'm just glad you're back with us. That's all that matters, David." And as much as I wanted to be grateful for that, the truth was, I couldn't help but feel a pang of loneliness. I wasn't the same person I was before the surgery, before I came so close to death. And now, I was struggling to find my place in the world again. I wasn't just trying to convince Anne, I was trying to convince myself that what I had seen, what I had experienced, was real. But reality, as it turned out, was a lot harder to grasp when you're the only one who's seen the other side. And it wasn't just Anne. My children, too, my grown-up children, didn't understand. They thought I was going through a phase, or maybe even a bit of post-surgery confusion. They didn't get why I seemed to spend so much time in my own head, staring off into the distance as I tried to make sense of it all. They didn't realize that I wasn't just thinking about my life, about them. I was thinking about the other side, the peace, the love. And it was all so real to me. But it was so hard to put into words. I started to retreat into myself, not out of anger, but out of a sense of defeat. How could I share this new understanding? How could I explain that the way I viewed the world had changed completely, that the physical world we live in was just a fraction of a greater, more profound reality? I thought about the people at the church I had attended for years. Would they understand? Would they look at me the same way, or would they see me as a fool? I had spent so many years following the routines of life, praying, attending services, participating in the rituals, but none of it felt as important now as it had before. Now that I had seen beyond death, I realized that the love I had experienced wasn't confined to any one religion, any one set of beliefs. It was universal. Still, I didn't know how to communicate that. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just struggling with how others would perceive me, I was struggling with my own beliefs. Had I been wrong all along? Had I been clinging to an outdated notion of life and death, and now I had been shown a different truth? What did that mean for everything I had believed in? But then, one afternoon, something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic moment, but rather a quiet realization. As I sat with Anne and we drank coffee in our living room, I decided to try once more to explain what had happened. This time, I wasn't going to focus on the details of what I had seen. Instead, I was going to talk about what I had felt. "Anne," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "I've been thinking a lot about what I experienced. And I know I haven't made it easy for you to understand. But I need you to know this, it wasn't just a dream, or a hallucination. It was real. What I saw, what I felt, it was as real as this cup in my hands. It was real in a way that nothing else is. She looked at me carefully, her eyes softening, as if sensing that this time, I wasn't just sharing a memory, but something more important. I don't know if I can explain it, I continued. But I've learned something important. Something that's changed everything for me. And it's this: love is the answer. Love is everything. It's not just something we feel for the people in our lives. It's the force that holds everything together. It's what connects us to each other, to the universe, to everything. And didn't say anything for a long moment, and I thought perhaps I had lost her again. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can understand it all, David. But I see the change in you. You're not the man you were before. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's the best thing that's ever happened. I felt a rush of relief flood through me. Maybe she didn't understand everything, but she understood me. And that was enough. The truth is, there's no easy way to explain something like what I went through. It's hard enough to understand it myself, let alone make anyone else understand. But I realized that maybe I didn't need everyone to understand, not in the way I thought. Maybe the most important thing wasn't convincing others of what I had seen, but sharing the message that came with it, the message of love, connection, and peace. I didn't have all the answers, and I still didn't know exactly what to do with what I had learned. But I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't alone. And neither was anyone else. We were all connected, all of us, through the force of love, whether we recognized it or not. And that gave me a sense of peace, a peace I didn't have to explain to anyone. I had been given this gift, this understanding, and I didn't need to carry the burden of explaining it. All I had to do was live it. And that, in itself, was enough. Returning from that experience was nothing like I had imagined it would be. I thought that, with the clarity I had gained from that glimpse into the afterlife, everything else in my life would feel lighter. That my days would be filled with peace, that I'd wake up every morning feeling grounded in love and connected to the universe in a way I had never experienced before. But the reality, in those first weeks, was something else entirely. I wasn't at peace. Not completely, anyway. There was a constant struggle between the man I had been before my near-death experience, and the man I was becoming. I had seen the truth. I knew that the physical world we lived in wasn't the whole story. I had touched something greater, something deeper. But as I went about my daily life, I found myself tangled in the same mundane worries that had once dominated my existence. My work, for example, how could I go back to it? I had spent years striving for success, competing with others, and chasing goals that now seemed so trivial. The office was the same, the people the same. They still obsessed over deadlines, targets, and profits. But now, it all felt hollow. I couldn't stop thinking about the message of love and connection I had received, and it made everything else seem insignificant. I sat in meetings, nodding along to discussions about sales strategies, market share, and profit margins, but inside, I felt like a stranger. The people I once considered colleagues, friends even, now seemed like actors playing roles in a world I didn't belong to. I didn't fit in anymore, and I wasn't sure how to reconcile the two parts of myself, the man who had seen beyond the veil and the man who still had to live in this world. And then there was Anne. She was still the same, still the woman I had loved all these years, but I found myself wanting to tell her so much more. I wanted to share the depth of what I had learned, the connection I felt to her, to everything. But it was as if I couldn't find the right words. Every time I tried to talk to her about it, I saw the confusion in her eyes again, and it was as though the gap between us grew wider, not smaller. I wanted to tell her that everything was different now, that the love I felt for her was not just the love of a man for his wife, but something eternal, something deeper. But when I opened my mouth, the words didn't come. How could I explain something so profound without sounding crazy? Without making her think I was losing my mind? There were moments when I would catch myself staring out the window, watching the world go by, and I'd feel this overwhelming sense of grief. I wasn't grieving for anyone who had passed away, I had made peace with that. No, what I was grieving was the world I had left behind, the world that still went on without me, as if nothing had changed. People still went about their lives, chasing the same things, worrying about the same things. And I couldn't fit back into that world. I wasn't the same anymore. I found myself sitting alone, staring into the darkness, wondering if I had made the right choice to return. I wondered if I should have stayed on the other side, where I had felt so much peace, so much love. What was the point of coming back to a world that felt so distant, so disconnected? But then, one morning, I woke up and looked at myself in the mirror. For the first time since my return, I saw something different. I saw the man who had returned from the other side, but I also saw the man who still had work to do here. I wasn't meant to stay on the other side. I had been given the gift of life, and I had been sent back for a reason. I had a purpose. And that purpose wasn't to wallow in confusion or frustration. It was to take what I had learned and live it. It was to bring the love, the peace, and the connection I had felt on the other side into my everyday life, no matter how hard it was. It was to be the bridge between the two worlds, the world of the living and the world of the eternal. I started small. I reached out to my colleagues, not with a desire to change the company's strategies or profits, but with a new perspective, one of compassion. I began to listen more, to ask questions that were less about performance and more about connection. How were they feeling? What was weighing on their hearts? I still worked hard, but I did so with the intention of creating a workplace that was not just about productivity but about the people who made it work. With Anne, I tried again. This time, I didn't try to explain everything to her. Instead, I simply started living in a way that reflected the change within me. I showed her, through my actions, how much I loved her, not just as my wife, but as a soul who was on this journey with me. I made sure she knew she was the most important person in my life. And slowly, I saw the understanding in her eyes. She didn't need to understand everything I had experienced. She just needed to see the love in my actions. And for the first time since my return, I felt a sense of peace that I had longed for. It wasn't perfect, and I still had moments of doubt, but I realized that peace wasn't something I had to search for outside of myself. It was something I could create in the here and now, in the choices I made and the love I shared. I wasn't alone in this world anymore, and I didn't need to retreat into myself. I was surrounded by people, by family, by friends, by colleagues, and each of them had their own struggles, their own journeys. And if I could be present with them, if I could share the love I had discovered, then maybe I could help them find peace too. So, I kept going. One day at a time. Living with intention. Living with love. And slowly, the world around me began to change. It's funny how life can sometimes send you a wake-up call when you least expect it. After the initial struggle of trying to fit back into the old world, I began to settle into a new rhythm. I was more present with Anne and the kids. I paid attention to the things that really mattered, relationships, connections, love. I made sure that each day counted. But even though I was learning to embrace this new version of myself, life still had a way of shaking me to the core. It was on a Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk in the office, trying to get through a pile of paperwork. The stress of work had finally caught up to me again. The noise of the office, the constant phone calls, the ticking clock, it all felt suffocating. I looked out the window, trying to clear my mind, but instead, my thoughts wandered back to that place I had seen after I nearly died. I thought about the peace, the profound stillness, and the overwhelming love that filled me. It felt like the opposite of what I was experiencing at that very moment. I closed my eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. I needed to get away from this. I needed a break, some time to reset. But as I opened my eyes, something happened that I could never have predicted. A loud crash interrupted the afternoon quiet. I jumped in my seat, my heart leaping into my throat. The sound came from the hallway, something heavy had fallen. Without thinking, I sprang up and rushed toward the sound. I was terrified it was something serious, maybe an accident or someone had fallen. When I turned the corner, I saw the office manager, Linda, on the ground, clutching her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. She couldn't breathe. "Linda!" I yelled, rushing to her side. "What happened? Are you okay?" She struggled to speak, gasping for air. I can't breathe." Her voice was barely a whisper, and her body trembled uncontrollably. My heart was pounding. I had been CPR certified years ago, but I had never expected to need it in a moment like this. My hands were shaking, but I knew I had to act quickly. I pressed my ear to her chest, listening for a heartbeat. Her pulse was weak, faint, but it was there. I knew she wasn't gone yet. But she was fading fast. I called 911, my voice shaky as I explained the situation. My thoughts raced, wondering how long it would take for the paramedics to arrive. I could see Linda's face turning blue, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know how much longer she had. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. In that moment, something strange happened. A calmness washed over me, not the kind of panic I would have expected, but the same stillness I had felt on the other side of life. It was like I was in two places at once. My hands were performing CPR, but my mind was elsewhere, remembering the feeling of peace, the certainty that everything would be okay. I didn't understand it, but in that moment, I knew Linda wasn't alone. I wasn't alone. In the midst of the chaos, I felt a presence. A warmth that enveloped the room. It was as though I was being guided, not just by my training, but by something greater, something that connected us all. I kept pressing on her chest, not knowing if it would make a difference, but determined to do everything I could. The sound of sirens in the distance brought a sense of relief. The paramedics rushed in, taking over, and I stepped back, my body still trembling from the effort. They managed to stabilize her, but it was clear that her condition was critical. As they loaded Linda into the ambulance, I stood there in a daze, trying to process what had just happened. I had watched someone teeter on the edge of life and death, again. And once more, I was reminded of how fragile everything really was. But it was more than that. It was as if the universe had given me a second chance, not just for me, but for Linda too. I was meant to be there, in that moment, to help her, to show her that even in the most terrifying moments, we're never truly alone. As the ambulance disappeared from view, I stood there on the sidewalk, my heart still racing, my mind spinning. What had I just experienced? It wasn't just the trauma of the situation, the life and death struggle. No, it was something deeper, something I couldn't quite put into words. But I knew one thing for sure, it was a wake-up call. Life, death, love, they weren't separate from each other. They were intertwined, part of a greater whole. Linda's struggle had brought me back to the core of what I had learned, that love and connection were at the heart of everything. We were all just passing through, doing our best to make a difference, to leave something meaningful behind. Later that evening, after everything had calmed down, I called Anne. I needed to talk to her, to share what had happened. But more than that, I needed her to know that I was not the same person I had been before. "Anne," I said, "today I realized something. We don't always get to control when our time comes. But we can make sure that the time we do have is full of love. Every moment counts. It's not about the big things. It's about the small moments, the connections, the people we love." "I know, David," she said softly. "I see it in you. I see the change." And in that moment, I knew that the wake-up call wasn't just for me, it was for all of us. Life is fragile, fleeting, but it's also precious, beautiful. It's not about waiting for the right time or the right circumstances to live fully. It's about embracing the moment, living with love, and making a difference in the lives of those around you. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew that as long as I had love in my heart, I would continue to move forward, through the struggles, through the fears, and into the unknown. And I would face it all with the same peace and love I had felt on the other side. Because in the end, that's what really mattered. It was a wake-up call. But it was also a gift. And I wasn't going to waste it. The days that followed Linda's health scare felt like they were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Something had shifted in me that afternoon, something I could no longer ignore. It wasn't just the fear of mortality or the fragility of life that had hit me, it was the deep understanding that our time here was so brief. I had come so close to crossing over, and in doing so, I had been granted a second chance. A second chance to live fully, to love more deeply, and to embrace the unknowns of this world, knowing there was so much more beyond it. I realized that for much of my life, I had lived with a sense of control, a desire to know what would happen next, to plan, to avoid uncertainty. But that experience, that moment when I had hovered between life and death, had stripped that away from me. The truth was, we could never truly control what would happen next. We were all in the hands of something far greater than ourselves. And yet, rather than feeling fear, I felt a kind of peace in that uncertainty. I didn't need all the answers anymore. I didn't need to know every step of the journey. What mattered now was the faith I had in the process of living, in the love that connected us all, and in the wisdom that came from embracing the unknown. It wasn't always easy. I still had my doubts, my days of feeling like I didn't belong in this world anymore. There were moments when I would be sitting in a quiet room, thinking about the light, the love, the peace I had felt on the other side, and I would feel the ache of wanting to go back. But I knew I couldn't. I had been sent back for a reason, and it was up to me to figure out what that reason was. It was a Saturday afternoon when I went for a long walk, trying to clear my head. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm glow over everything. As I walked through the park, I noticed people enjoying the day, children running, couples sitting on benches, old friends chatting. Life, in all its simple glory, was unfolding around me. But I wasn't looking at it in the same way I once had. Before my near-death experience, I would have seen these moments as fleeting, inconsequential. But now, every moment seemed to shimmer with significance. Every conversation, every touch, every smile, it all carried a weight of love and connection that I had never truly seen before. I found myself sitting on a bench, watching the world go by. I thought about what I had learned, about how life wasn't just about the grand moments, the milestones, the achievements. It was about the small, seemingly insignificant interactions, the way a stranger smiled at you, the way a child's laugh could fill your heart with joy, the quiet moments spent with a loved one, just being present. And had always said that I was a workaholic, that I spent too much time focusing on the future and not enough on the present. Now, I understood what she meant. Before, I had always been so focused on what came next, on what I could achieve or acquire, that I had missed the beauty of the here and now. I had been so consumed by my own ambitions that I had failed to notice the moments of grace that happened every single day. As I sat there, a man walked by with his dog. The dog, a golden retriever, trotted up to me, wagging its tail and looking up at me with those big, friendly eyes. I couldn't help but laugh. The dog's joy was contagious. It reminded me of the simplicity of life, of the love we shared with those around us, whether human or animal. We don't need to understand everything. We don't need to have all the answers. Sometimes, we just need to be present and appreciate the love that's right in front of us. I reached out to pet the dog, and the man smiled at me. "He's friendly, don't worry," he said with a chuckle. "Thank you," I replied. I needed that. He nodded, understanding more than I had expected. He didn't need to know the details of my journey or the experiences I had had. In that moment, we were two souls sharing a simple, beautiful interaction. And that was enough. It was moments like that, I realized, that held the most meaning. In the past, I would have rushed past them, too focused on the next task or the next goal. But now, I savored every minute. I realized that each encounter, each moment of connection, was a gift, a fleeting but precious part of our shared experience. I began to see the world differently. The shadows that once loomed large in my mind, the fear of death, the fear of the unknown, had faded into the background. Instead, I began to focus on the beauty of life itself. The trees, the sky, the people I loved, the laughter of children, the warmth of the sun. It wasn't about fearing what was to come, but about living fully in the present, appreciating the small things, and embracing the unknowns of life. That's not to say the fear didn't occasionally creep back in. It did, of course. There were still moments when I was gripped by uncertainty, when I worried about what might happen next. But I had learned to sit with that fear, to accept it without letting it control me. Life, I had come to understand, was a balance of the known and the unknown, the joy and the fear, the light and the darkness. And that was okay. I began to notice a change in my relationships too. People started to notice that I was different, not just in the way I viewed the world, but in the way I interacted with them. I was more present. I listened more. I wasn't so quick to judge or criticize. I found myself saying, "I love you," more often, not just to Anne or the kids, but to my friends and even to strangers. I realized that love wasn't just something you felt, it was something you shared, something you lived. I had been given this second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. I had learned that there was no need to fear the unknown, that death was just a part of the journey, not the end of it. What mattered was how we lived, how we loved, how we connected, how we embraced every moment of life, even in its uncertainty. And so, as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I continued to embrace the unknown. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't need them. I had learned to trust the journey, to trust the love that guided me, and to be at peace with the mystery that lay ahead. In the end, I realized that the unknown wasn't something to fear. It was something to welcome, something to embrace with open arms, knowing that no matter what came next, I was ready. Ready to live, ready to love, ready to continue the journey. And that was enough. As time went on, my life took on a new rhythm, a new depth. The truth of my experience became clearer to me each day. The deeper I dove into the present moment, the more I realized that what I had felt when I was near death wasn't just a fleeting sensation, it was a fundamental truth about existence. Love, connection, and peace weren't abstract ideas, they were tangible forces that connected everything in the universe. They were the very fabric of life itself. There were still times when I would find myself overwhelmed by the ordinary demands of life, meetings, bills, deadlines, but those moments had become less frequent. I had learned to balance the weight of responsibility with the lightness of knowing that nothing in this world could truly be controlled, and yet, everything was held together by the power of love and the choices we made. I had started seeing things differently, my relationships with Anne and the kids deepened, as did my connection with the people around me. I had become more patient, more present. I took time to listen, really listen, to what others were saying, to feel their pain, their joy, their fears. I had begun to understand that everyone was carrying something. Everyone was on their own journey, and all of us were simply trying to make sense of this strange, beautiful existence. But there was one thing that still lingered in my mind, one question I couldn't shake. If life and death were so interconnected, if the love we shared in this life was so profound and eternal, then why was it so hard for us to understand it fully while we were still alive? It was a question I had asked Anne many times, but she never seemed to have an answer. She was a woman of faith, of course, but her faith had always been more grounded, more focused on the here and now. For her, death was something you just accepted, something you didn't question. But for me, it was different. I had felt it. I had seen it. And yet, there was still a part of me that struggled to integrate that experience into the ordinary flow of daily life. One evening, after dinner, as we were sitting on the couch together, I turned to Anne and said, "I've been thinking a lot about something lately." She looked at me with a kind smile, the same smile she always had when she knew I was about to say something important. "What's on your mind?" "I can't stop thinking about what's next," I said. What happens after this life? I know what I saw, and I felt it. The love. The peace. The light. But why is it so hard for us to see it clearly while we're alive? And paused for a moment, her gaze softening. Maybe it's not that we don't see it, David. Maybe it's that we don't believe it until we're faced with the truth of it. Maybe the mystery is what keeps us moving forward, makes us want to reach for something beyond ourselves. I shook my head slightly, still trying to make sense of it all. I've seen the truth. I've felt it. I know it. But when I look around, it seems like so many people are lost. So many people are stuck in fear, in worry, in conflict. And I don't understand why. If they only knew what I've seen, what I've felt. And took my hand in hers, squeezing it gently. Maybe you're right, she said. Maybe if people truly knew, they would live differently. But maybe, David, not everyone is meant to understand it the way you do. Maybe some of us are meant to experience it slowly, piece by piece, over time. And maybe that's okay. Her words hit me with the force of a revelation. I had been so focused on trying to share the truth of my experience with everyone around me, but perhaps I had been missing something important. Maybe the journey of discovery wasn't meant to happen all at once. Maybe each person's path was different, and not everyone would see the truth the way I had. I thought about the way I had tried to explain my experience to Anne at first, how I had wanted her to understand everything all at once. But now I saw that perhaps the truth couldn't be forced. It had to unfold naturally, over time, in its own way. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I didn't have to understand everything all at once either. I didn't have to explain everything. I didn't have to rush the process or push anyone to see what I had seen. The love, the connection, the peace, they were already there. All I had to do was live them. Live with them. And that was enough. The next few months were some of the most peaceful I had ever known. I woke up each morning with a deep sense of gratitude for the life I had been given, for the love I had in my life, for the opportunities to make a difference, even in small ways. I focused less on trying to control things and more on being present with whatever life brought my way. It was a Saturday morning when the phone call came. I was out in the garden, working on some plants, when I heard the phone ring inside. I didn't rush to answer it. I had learned by then that things could wait. But when I did pick it up, I found out that Linda, the woman I had helped during that near-death emergency months ago, had passed away. At first, I was stunned. I had been so sure she would recover. I had been hopeful that she would make it through, that she would have more time to live her life. But the reality hit me hard. She was gone. I sat down on the edge of the porch, my mind racing. But then, something strange happened. I wasn't consumed by grief the way I would have been before. I wasn't angry or bitter. Instead, I felt a deep sense of peace. I felt, for the first time, that Linda was exactly where she was meant to be. I knew she was surrounded by the same light, the same love, that I had felt when I was on the other side. I wasn't afraid for her. I wasn't afraid of death at all anymore. And as I sat there, in the stillness of the moment, I understood something new. Life and death were not opposites, they were part of the same continuum, two sides of the same coin. We are born, we live, and we die. But in the end, it's all one continuous journey, a journey of love, connection, and growth. Linda's passing didn't scare me. It reminded me of the truth I had learned, that love doesn't end with death. It transforms. It continues. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what came next, I would never be alone. I was connected to everyone, and to everything. Always. Death had lost its grip on me. It was no longer something to fear, but something to embrace as part of the eternal cycle of life. And as long as I carried love in my heart, I knew that I would never truly be apart from those I loved, either in this life or the next. It was a beautiful, liberating realization. And it was the final piece of the puzzle that had been slowly coming together since that fateful moment when I had crossed over. Love is eternal. And that was all I needed to know. The days that followed Linda's passing felt strangely calm. The world continued to turn, and yet, I felt as though I was moving through it differently now. I had always believed that time was the measure of our lives, that each year, each decade, was a marker for how far we'd come. But now I saw time differently. Time was a river, flowing endlessly, and we were all just floating along in its current, each of us trying to make sense of where we fit into the vastness of it all. I had spent so much of my life chasing after things, success, achievement, the promise of a better future, but now, I understood something profound. It wasn't the things we accumulate that matter, it's the love we give, the relationships we build, the way we touch the lives of those around us. The material world, with its pressures and deadlines, had lost its grip on me. What mattered now was what I did with the time I had left, how I loved, how I connected, how I lived in the light. As the months passed, I began to find joy in the simplest of moments. I would take long walks through the neighborhood, observing the small details I had once ignored, how the sunlight filtered through the trees, the sound of children laughing, the smell of freshly cut grass. Every moment felt sacred, like a piece of the puzzle I had been searching for all along. And noticed the change in me, of course. She always did. She would smile when I took a moment to stop and appreciate the beauty of a sunset or when I lingered over our conversations, listening more intently. And the kids, well, they seemed to sense something too. The way I hugged them a little tighter, the way I told them how much they meant to me, how I asked about their lives, how I showed up, really showed up, for them. I had become more open, more present. The man I had been before was still there, but he was softer now, more at peace. I was still David, but I was David with a deeper understanding of what really mattered. I understood now that the journey wasn't just about surviving, it was about truly living. One evening, not long after Linda's passing, Anne and I were sitting on the back porch, watching the stars. We were quiet for a long time, just soaking in the night air. Finally, Anne spoke. "You've changed," she said gently. I looked over at her, unsure of what she meant. "How do you mean?" "You're different, David. You're more peaceful. You're more present. It's like you're really here, with us, in a way you never were before." I nodded, understanding what she meant. "I know. I've been thinking a lot about life. About death. And about what's really important." And reached over and took my hand, her grip warm and steady. "And what is important, David?" I thought for a moment, watching the soft glow of the porch light reflecting off her face. "Love," I said simply. "Love is the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that lasts. The love we share with each other, the way we make people feel. It's the only thing that transcends time, transcends everything." I think I always knew that, but I never truly understood it until now. She smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "I think you're right," she said. "But I also think it's more than just the love we give. It's also about the love we receive. And sometimes, that's the hardest part." I thought about that for a moment, feeling the weight of her words. I had spent so much of my life focused on what I could give, but I had never fully considered how hard it could be to receive love. To truly allow yourself to be open, to let go of the barriers you've built, to let people in. I had learned to give love more freely, but now, I realized, I had to learn how to receive it, too. Over the next few weeks, I made a conscious effort to be more open with those I loved. I told Anne more often how much I appreciated her, how grateful I was for the life we had built together. I hugged my children longer, made more time for them. I took time to listen to my friends, to hear their stories, to be present with them. It wasn't about doing more, it was about being more in the moment, more aware of the love that surrounded me. The change wasn't always easy. Sometimes, I found myself slipping back into old habits, focusing on work or getting caught up in the busyness of life. But every time that happened, I would pause, take a breath, and remember the light I had seen, the light that was always there, just waiting for me to notice it. The truth I had learned on the other side was simple, but profound: life is fleeting, and death is just another part of the journey. What matters is how we live in between, how we love, how we show up for each other, how we connect. It wasn't about waiting for some grand moment or achievement, it was about finding the sacred in the everyday. The love we give, the way we show up for each other, that's what lasts. That's what makes a difference. I began to think more about the people I had lost in my life, my parents, friends, even acquaintances, and how their love still remained with me, how it continued to shape who I was. I felt a deep sense of connection to them, as though they were still here, in some way. And I began to wonder if perhaps that was what the other side was all about. Maybe it wasn't about leaving everything behind, maybe it was about finding a deeper, more profound connection to everything and everyone. And in that realization, I found peace. One evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of the house, I had another one of those moments of clarity. It was as if the light had come full circle, wrapping me in its warmth. I felt at peace with myself, with the world, and with what awaited me. I didn't fear death anymore. I didn't fear the unknown. In fact, I had come to see it as a continuation of the journey, not an end. Life and death were part of the same dance, two sides of the same coin. And in that dance, love was the thread that held everything together. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the stars. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't searching for answers. I wasn't wondering what came next. I wasn't trying to figure it all out. I was simply living. And in that simplicity, I found the peace I had been searching for all along. "I'm ready," I whispered to the night. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." And with that, I knew, deep in my heart, that the journey, whatever it might hold, was one I would face with love, with grace, and with the light that had guided me all along. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?